Iraqi forces are just a few streets away from what's left of Daesh in Mosul. Its stronghold has been weakened, down to nearly 200 fighters. Now they're completely surrounded.
Troops of the Emergency Rapid Division advanced from the south of the old city towards the heart of the city, and they managed to reach Khalid ibn al-Walid Street deep inside the old city in relatively record time. We killed a large number of foreign Daesh fighters and freed families.
Fighting is intensifying, but nearly 600 Iraqi civilians are still trapped in the old city. TRT World correspondent Nicole Johnston is on the ground in Mosul.
The lives of the people of Mosul are in ruins,
where she's seen hundreds of families make a run for safety, including one woman carrying a 10-day-old baby and others who've left loved ones behind. Daesh fighters are also making their escape, leaving Iraqi forces trying to discern who is the enemy and who is not.
Do you believe in God? I swear to God. I swear I don't belong to Daesh. I am with the people here. I belong to the people here.
The fall of Mosul could be just days away. But Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has already declared victory. A victory that will look like this. No water, food, or homes for people to return to. Where will Mosul's residents go now? And who will people blame for the destruction of this city? Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Baghdad by the spokesman for the Mosul counterterrorism unit, Sabah al-Nu'man. In Tunis, we have former UN advisor Zaid al-Ali. He's also the author of The Struggle for Iraq's Future. And from Doha, Martin Reardon is the senior vice president of the Sufan Group, a security and intelligence firm. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Sabah Nu'man, if I can begin with you, sir, is the battle for Mosul over?
Well, we are very, very close to announce the liberation of Mosul because all the security forces, they are coming very close to achieve the last targets in order to announce the liberation of the old city of Mosul. And with that, we can say that we are defeating ISIS from this area. We had a very, very tough battle in the past few days. The enemy, they are subgroups hiding in the trench and among the old houses. They are trying to escape from the battlefield, or most of them, they are suicides. So they are looking for a chance to explode themselves in front of the security forces. But we are very aware to this manner of fight, and this is not a new thing that we faced the ISIS and their ideology and their ways to fight. So the CTS counterterrorism forces, they are very expert in such a fight like this, which is the street fights and among the civilians. So we achieved our goals, and I can say that we are very close, about 300 meters or less than this, to reach the side of Tiger, and with that we can say that we finished our goals.
Okay, Mr. Nu'man, given that there are still 300 meters to the Tigris, and that Daesh still has fighters who are still fighting, and as you mentioned, suicide bombers, car bombers, was it maybe wrong for Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to declare victory, to say that you had won? Maybe he should have waited until you completely destroyed Daesh. Maybe he was wrong.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Abadi, he asked the leaders, the field leaders, to give him the right reports and final reports that they are finished their goals. So he passed this mission to the leaders, to the commands on the field, to clear the area and to check that there is no any danger. Furthermore, there is no any suicide, no any fighters. Maybe they hide and exploit themselves when we are declare this. So we want to be sure that when the Prime Minister declare and announce the liberation of Mosul, it will not be anything destroy or dismiss this announcement.
Okay, Martin Reardon, is there cause for celebration, not just in terms of on the battlefield in Iraq, but in terms of the global fight against Daesh?
And I think the Prime Minister is correct. It's just a matter of time, whether that's hours or the next few days, before Mosul is completely recaptured and ISIS in Mosul as a fighting force is defeated. But we have to keep in mind that Islamic State or ISIS does not have to have territory to maintain its integrity. And I think they've been preparing for this for the last 3 years, at least for a year. I remember June of 2016, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani announced to the world that just because Islamic State may lose Mosul, Raqqa, and even Sirte, doesn't mean they're defeated. They can go back underground, come back up as an insurgency, and resurface someplace else at a time and place of their choosing, whether that's in Iraq and Syria, somewhere else in North Africa or West Africa, in Yemen, in the Caucasus, wherever.
Yeah, difficult to destroy militarily a really terrible idea that has metastasized. Zaid al-Ali, Mosul's on the verge of being liberated, but has it come at a horrendous cost, given that so many civilians have been killed?
I mean, there's no question that there's a lot to be happy about, and there's a lot to be unhappy about. Everyone should be happy about the fact that Mosul will soon be free of ISIS control. But looking at the scenes of the displaced persons and the displaced persons' camps, it's very hard to be jubilant in the circumstances. And also thinking about the future, it's difficult to be optimistic as well, considering that all of the reforms that people have been waiting for the Iraqi government to enact to its judicial sector, to its police, to the intelligence sector have basically not taken place. And there's an expectation amongst many that despite the successes in Mosul, which are very significant, that there's a serious risk that the displaced persons will not be able to go home soon, that if they do go home, that they won't be given adequate support, that if they do go home, that they'll be left basically to their own devices, and also that whatever happens, however they go home or whenever they go home, that the security sector in Iraq won't be capable of keeping the country safe from terrorism, as we've already seen now in parts of the country that have been liberated, such as Tikrit for some time, where ISIS has already managed to reestablish a presence and has already carried out significant operations in those places.
Martin Reardon, do you share those fears that Daesh or maybe something with another name will be able to regenerate long after Mosul has been liberated, because structurally, systemically, a lot of the core issues haven't been resolved?
I agree. I think we're looking at a couple of things. There were reasons, social, political, and economic, that Daesh, or their predecessor, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, came into being. And those reasons, to some extent, at least from the Sunni population there in western Iraq and northern Iraq, was the disenfranchisement by the government. The al-Abadi government is going to have to correct those perceptions of disenfranchisement, or ISIS can go underground and then resurface again, whether it's weeks or months down the road, but they will resurface if those issues are not corrected. And we see this with terrorism everywhere. It's not just Iraq, it's just not Syria, it's everywhere where you have the terrorism in areas where they're poorly governed. The people are disenfranchised. That has to be corrected. Otherwise, you're going to see a number of different things. Some of the fighters may switch allegiance. They could go with Jabhat al-Sham. They could go with Ahrar al-Sham. Some may switch over to al-Qaeda or with other rebel groups. Others will return to their home countries. Remember, there are 5,000 foreign fighters just from Western Europe, several thousand from North Africa, 2,500 from Saudi Arabia. They'll go back and they'll fight there or in another conflict zone in an area that gives them what they need, lack of governance.
Sabah Nouman, does your government have a clear plan to help people, especially just ordinary Sunnis who have been caught up in the violence, to help them after you have retaken Mosul?
Certainly, sir. When we are putting the plan for liberation Mosul and defeating ISIS, in the same time, the Iraqi government and the local governments, they made their plan for saving the people, supporting the people, also return back the people from the camps to their own houses, rebuilding the city. All these things, it's stuck in the mind when we put the plan for defeat ISIS and liberate the Mosul. So nowadays, there are many neighborhoods that we liberated that it's faced the return back of the civilians to their houses, and the local government of Mosul, and also the many constitutions, many governorates also that support them, and also many organizations, they are working now in Mosul to rebuild the area, rebuild the houses, and also maintain the victory that's happened in these neighborhoods in order to stop the enemy from returning back. And we want to be ensured that this area, they become very safe, and there are no more dangerous against them. So this is plan. It is when we are putting the plan for liberation the Mosul and defeating the ISIS.
Zaid al-Ali, do you think that the Iraqi government has learned from its mistakes of the past, whether it was major policy mistakes from Nouri al-Maliki or crimes of Hashd al-Sha'bi and others which created many of these current problems? Do you think it's learned from those mistakes, Zaid?
Well, I think some people, some individuals, some officials in the Iraqi government have definitely learned the mistake. We've seen it from statements that have been made from various people, including in the Golden Brigade. But whether or not the Iraqi state as a whole and its institutions have learned those lessons, first of all, and second of all, whether or not it has the capacity to act on any lessons learned, that's really subject to question. If you look at, for example, the legislative agenda in Parliament, look at the laws that have been passed over the past 3-4 years, and the quality of the laws, the detail, and so on and so forth, it's really lacking. First of all, because mainly it doesn't focus on security, it doesn't focus on judicial reform, doesn't focus on rule of law reform, so on and so forth. It really reads like a list of international agreements that the Iraqi state is adhering to. And it doesn't feel like, when you look at the list of laws that have passed, it doesn't at all feel like that it's a country that's in a state of conflict. That's one thing. And second thing, of course, I'm always delighted to hear that measures have been made and taken to rebuild and to control and so on and so forth, but there's a question of capacity, of financial capacity. I mean, the amount of destruction in Mosul and Ramadi and in other places is really very, very, very high, and it's going to cost a huge amount of money to reconstruct all of that. And the Iraqi state, as everyone well knows, relies exclusively on oil revenues in order to finance its budget, and oil revenues are relatively low at the moment in comparison to previous years. So unless there's a huge increase at some stage, there's going to be some serious problems down the road.
Zaid, does it need...
That, once again, goes... Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. Does Iraq need more international help, particularly spearheaded by the United States? At the moment, the U.S. is providing advisors and air cover and airstrikes and so on. But beyond that, does Iraq need to go back to go forward, and does it need to re-invite the Americans?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by re-invite the Americans. If what you mean by that is to invite the Americans to be back in Iraq presently, to be present in Iraq physically, and to have huge numbers of troops and so on and so forth, I definitely don't think we need that, and I don't think that would help. After all, it was under American occupation that these problems started occurring, of Al-Qaeda and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's a solution at all. Whether or not I do think, however, that Iraq could do with significant international support to finance and to help finance or help organize the reconstruction. And actually, there is some assistance that's being delivered at the moment, but I don't think it's going to be forthcoming. I don't think Iraq should expect that there'll be a huge amount of assistance, at least not much more than is already taking place. And whatever assistance is delivered, in my view, should really be conditioned on the Iraqis diversifying their economy and improving the rule of law, principally improving the rule of law. Your other guest referred to disenfranchisement of the Sunni population. I agree with that, but only to the extent that it relates to the rule of law.
Right.
Some people refer to disenfranchisement of the Sunni population to mean that Sunnis need better representation in government. I don't think that's a real issue for the average Sunni. What I do think they really need is to be sure that when they walk down the street, that they won't be arrested randomly and tortured for no reason. That's a real concern, and that goes to rule of law reform. And that's something that really needs to be taken seriously and sadly has not been done so far.
Martin Reardon, do you fear that Daesh, in losing Mosul, which is almost an inevitability, might mythologize its loss and might actually use it as a rallying cry?
Yes, they will. I mean, the occupation of Mosul, just like Raqqa, was very important. And Islamic State has said that even if they cease to control those territories, they are going to come back. The caliphate will be reestablished, but in a longer time frame. So yes, they will use that as a rallying cry, but they may resurface elsewhere in Iraq, elsewhere in Syria, or elsewhere in the Middle East, North Africa, or West Africa as well, or Pakistan as well.
Sabah Noman, interesting talk and chatter about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in the past few weeks. The Russians had said that they might have killed him, and then others had said, no, he's alive and well. You understand this better than most of us. You're fighting Daesh on the ground. My first question to you is, do you think he's alive or dead? And my second question to you is, does it matter?
We heard about that from the media, and there is some intelligence, foreign intelligence said about that. But of course, we have to check this informations. We are checking the truth of this. What we heard, our intelligence in different ways. They are looking for al-Baghdadi, checking these informations. Of course, we can't say that unless we are very sure that this is the truth, so that we have to keep the trust of the society and the world about the informations that we are give to the society. So we are looking for that. I think al-Baghdadi, he's out of Mosul. Maybe he's now in the desert between Iraq and Syria. And we are ensured to have more informations about that. We have to maybe we get useful by interrogation of the ISIS that we are capturing them, if they have any successful or good information about that. If you ask me, is it matter or does it matter that is it important that when we sure that he's died? I think Abu Bakr Baghdadi, he lost the command of his leaders and his followers since a long time, because before we starting the liberation in Mosul, we heard and we get a very trust information that there is some conflict between the leaders, especially the Iraqi and the foreign leaders of ISIS. And with that, al-Baghdadi, because he's out of Mosul, he loses the command, he loses his initiative of his followers in Mosul. So I think it doesn't matter now and further about the killing of al-Baghdadi, because he loses his command on his followers, right. And and ISIS he loses the connection between themselves. So it doesn't matter now. It's my opinion.
And that's very interesting to hear from you, because you've got your ear on the ground and you're involved in Iraqi counterterrorism, fighting Daesh. That's the belief from the Iraqis. Let me ask Martin Reardon. Martin, does that square with what you know and what you're hearing, that Baghdadi is almost irrelevant now? He's less important to Daesh than maybe bin Laden was to Al-Qaeda?
Well, not comparing him to bin Laden, but I think we've seen this in the last 16 years. Decapitation of terrorist leadership has very little effect or a very short-term effect on the capabilities of that organization. Al-Qaeda in the last 16 years, their leadership has been decimated, both in Pakistan, in North Africa, in Yemen. And yet, lieutenants rise up to the ranks and they maintain control of those organizations. And I think we're going to see the same thing with Islamic State. Regardless of what happens in Mosul and Raqqa and elsewhere, or regardless of what happens to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, one of the very capable lieutenants will rise to the occasion, or maybe somebody new, and they'll take control of the organization. You may even have Islamic State merge forces with other organizations.
Just before I wrap, Zaid al-Ali, give me a reason to be optimistic about Iraq.
That's a difficult question, I'm afraid. I mean, as I mentioned before, the long-term indicators for Iraq are very, very difficult. You know, the economically, socially, everything. I mean, you know, the one thing that you can say, at least in comparison to the previous few years, is that the government now broadly in Baghdad is under the control of forces that are a lot more sympathetic towards democracy than they were in 2012, 2013, so on and so forth.
Right. Unfortunately, I've got to wrap, but gentlemen, it's been great getting your myriad perspectives on the program. Zaid al-Ali, Martin Riordan, and Sabah al-Nu'man. Thank you very much, gentlemen.